Howdy everybody, it's Amy from Amy's Sparkly Diamond Painting, and this probably looks a little bit different here. This is a cross stitch video. I am going to try to do a little bit of a tutorial and general talking about backstitch and tips and tricks and all that good stuff. So consider this more of a tutorial video, but I'm going to start out easy. So what I have before me is some 6-count fabric here. You can actually buy this at Michael's, probably also on Amazon. I bought some 9-count on Amazon. They probably sell the 6-count as well. But I thought that the 6-count squares would be a little bit easier to do more of a tutorial on. And then I have some supplies here, some thread for that. And then I have a couple cross-stitch kits. These are kits that I've already stitched, but they had some different styles of backstitching on them, so I thought I'd show you a little bit of backstitching on real projects and why it's important and the difference it can make on various projects. So that is the plan. We'll see how this goes. So if you're new to my channel, welcome in. I do mostly diamond painting, but I also do cross stitch from time to time. And I do budget-friendly companies with stamped cross stitch, as well as premium diamond painting companies. I don't really do as much of the US-based more premium cross stitch because they don't come stamped and my eyes just can't do linen and some of the smaller counts. So that's why I use mostly stamped cross stitch now. But anyway, so if you're new here, welcome in and hope you like what you see. And if you want to see more, go ahead and hit the like, subscribe button, all that good stuff. So let's get started. First off, the question is, why backstitch? Well, I have a couple goodies here. This is actually one of my favorite precious stitching items. I've had this for many, many years. This is a needle case. It's magnetic there, holds most of my needles. But I stitched this many years ago from a convention. It was a course that I took at a cross-stitch convention in Austin back, I think, around 1997. And I was moving to San Angelo at that time, and I met up with my sister and my mom, and we spent a few days in Austin during my moving process at this cross-stitch convention. And I took a course from Maureen Appleton, who was one of the early people to show kits and do stitching with one thread over one piece, 1-count linen there. So hopefully you can see this. The linen is really tiny. So this is either 32 count. I don't think it's 36. I think it's 32 count there. Maybe 28. But it's really, really small. So this is stitching 1/1, and you can see the gorgeous detail that you get from doing that high detailed pattern in such a small area. But the point that I'm showing this is, first off, I needed my needles. But second off, this has a lot of backstitch on it. And without the backstitch, you'd have a hard time seeing all the details in these little flowers. So there is, I'll talk about the good and the less good, I guess, about backstitch, is that the good is that you can really get a lot of detail even in tiny designs. So backstitch is great for highlighting certain areas like these flowers. Here, the different petals. It's also good when you don't have enough space to give detail through the squares. So diamond painting is pixel art, and so is cross stitch, but diamond painting, we don't have an equivalent of backstitch. So you have to make the designs really big to make the details and say faces and animals and all that. However, cross stitch, because we have backstitch available, we can make things with just fewer pixels because we can use the lines of backstitch to maybe highlight a mouth or eyes or different shapes and figures on a small painting. So I have a couple couple cross stitches here. This one I actually just finished this morning. This is one I was working on. It's a bookmark. It's one of the budget-friendly kits. It's non-branded. Not sure what the brand was. But this is an example where there was no backstitching on it. And it's okay for this design. The trees kind of blend a little bit into the background, and you have the different mountains here. This could benefit a little bit though from some backstitching, outlining the different trees, maybe giving a few highlights to the ground, and also maybe a few highlights in the hills or mountains. So a lot of the budget-friendly kits that you get, the unnamed, unbranded ones, they don't have backstitch for those details. You can find those same designs actually over in the diamond painting section as well, because they are just pixel squares, and it's easier to do a computer rendering of a pixel square chart without worrying about the backstitching. Now the better named brands like Spring Brand, Joy Sunday, all those, they are hand rendered or computer rendering with the backstitch added, but usually they're more hand rendered, and that's why you see backstitch on those that you don't see on some of the budget-friendly ones. So backstitching, why is it needed? Well, this is a good example of one where this wouldn't really be a cactus without the backstitching lines here. So we could do this one as a diamond painting, just following the square chart, but we couldn't add all those details of the cactus thorns there. So in order to make this one a diamond painting, it would have to be much larger in order to have actual squares charted out for those different lines in the cactus. So we can do cross stitches much smaller to get much more detail with the backstitching. Another example here, this is European Town. It's a very popular one. This is the Joy Sunday version. Spring now has a brand of this one as well. But this is a village here with a lot of people and a lot of little details on it. Let's see if I can find some of the details here. So this one requires backstitch because you have these little tiny people, and if you imagine those without the backstitch, you couldn't see any details there. So the backstitch will give definition to the little face, the hair, the threads, and that little dog too. He'd be hard to make out what he is without the backstitch to do the nose and the eye and the little shapes of his legs to be able to tell what's going on there. So backstitch is sometimes really important in a design, especially a design with smaller elements, or in the case of the cactus, it wouldn't be a cactus without having those thorns in there. So that's why backstitch is good, because it can really bring out details of a design that you wouldn't see in something like this where you don't have backstitch in it. So the not so good, well, it takes more time because you do the backstitch after you're done with the design. So you wouldn't want to do a backstitch until all the stitching is complete, because you're doing little lines between the stitches, and those little lines between the stitches will get lost if you don't have all your stitching done. So you first complete the entire cross stitch and then you go back and do the back stitching. But because the entire cross stitch is completed there on a stamped cross stitch, you don't see any back stitching lines on here. So you have to follow a pattern to know how to do the back stitch. It's not a deal breaker. I think actually back stitching is pretty easy once you get the hang of it and do a few things with it and try a few projects with it. You'll be able to actually guess without even looking at the chart where you might need to backstitch and how you might want to trace out something with backstitch. You do always have the chart to fall back on, but once you've done it a few times, you'll see it's actually much easier than it looks. So we're gonna show some examples here. So I got my scissors. This is just leftover threads from another project. And I have here my 6 count that I've drawn a few designs on. So we're gonna start with the basic and work our way up with backstitch. So I have something here with just straight lines. I drew this with not erasable, but dissolvable ink that you use from, say, quilting stores that you draw on fabric. So that's what this is. So I could make it go away if I wanted to. But we can start out with just simple upward vertical or horizontal lines, and that's what you can use to maybe trace out pixels. But you can get a lot more complicated with backstitch, and that's by using diagonals and even longer stitches. So this one has some diagonals in it, which is something you can't do with diamond painting either. So we can draw some diagonal lines. So we're gonna maybe use that shape. And then this shape is a bit more complicated. Imagine this is like a tree, and the tree gets narrow as you go up. So I have some diagonals here, but then these stitches get longer and longer as we go down the tree. So that's why this is here, and then I drew something really long and bizarre down here just to show. And because I thought we should have a little design to work on, kind of real world, I have this that I just made up. So I had just grabbed a pile of leftovers from that bookmark and used those to come up with at least a small design where we could do some backstitching maybe on a design. And then finally, like I said, both of these projects are finished. So this one has a little bit easier backstitch, more of the horizontal and vertical lines rather than the diagonals. And then this one is a little bit more complicated with the fur on the animal here doing some zigzags. So we can show some on real Joy Sunday 14 count cross stitches. So that's the plan. Let us begin. I already picked out a needle here. So this is 6 count, so my needle had to be really big. And for this stitching, I used all 6 strands on there to make the cross stitches. You probably needed more like 8 strands to really fill it in, but I was just trying to do something really quick. So for the first tutorial, I'm going to use black because black is just so much easier to see, and I'm going to use it full thickness. So typically with a pattern, you use backstitch based on half the number of threads that your cross stitch is. And the pattern will tell you how many threads. But for example, or not half, -1, I should say. So for example, a 3 count, okay, we'll try this again. So you want to do the number of threads -1. So an 11 count, typically you use 3 threads to do your crosses. So backstitch is usually 2 threads for 11 count. And then for 14 count or 16 or even 18 count, you use 2 threads typically for the cross stitch, which means you use only 1 thread for backstitch because you don't want the backstitch to overwhelm your cross stitches. You just want it to be there without being too obvious. So I'm going to use the full 6 threads just for this little tutorial, but then once we get into these, we'll talk about the single threads or 2 threads and the different results that can happen based on the number of threads you use. So typically, I will separate these out into 6 individual strands and then put them back together. And the reason I do that is because I get better coverage on the canvas. And I can show you a little example here with this one. So this one, most of it, I just grabbed the piece of floss, all 6 strands, and just stitched with that. And that's why you see a lot of the white background there. This little area though, I already had a strand that had been separated for that bookmark that I was working on. So the separated strands just fill in a little bit better and the stitches come out a little bit smoother than the ones where you don't separate the threads. So you certainly don't have to separate the individual strands and put them back together, but I think it does make a much better end result when you do. And it's sometimes harder to tell with stamped cross stitch because I have not washed this one yet. So it looks like pretty good coverage, but that's because there's ink underneath here giving some color. So you don't see necessarily the white background yet. But when I wash this, there will be, like in this yellow, I can see some of the ink back there behind it. There will be some white showing up behind the stitches after I wash this. So sometimes with stamped cross stitch, it can be a little deceptive where you think you have good coverage and then you wash it and find out you don't, especially with something like a black background where it might really matter. So I'm going to cheat a little bit this first time. I wouldn't normally do this, but I have nose stitching here to work off of. I'm just gonna tie a knot, but normally you don't. So I'll do it the proper way down here because I have stitches already done that I can anchor my floss into the back, but up here I don't. So the idea with backstitch is to, well, let me just start with 1 stitch. Let me get it in there. So I'm gonna work on this vertical line here. So I'm first going to go and bring my needle up from behind and stitch back. So I'm going to go backwards for the next spot. It'll be more clear here after I get the first stitch done. So you'll see why it's called backstitch. So we're gonna go down this line. So what I want to do is bring up my needle up here, because that way I'm not poking into my threads. So if I were to come back here, if this was full of cross stitches and other threads, I would be poking into my backstitch threads and possibly separating them if there are 2 or 3 strands. So that's why it's always better to go forward here for the beyond where you're trying to stitch. And the other problem with full-length threads here is they like to knot up in the back. And then back towards the line that's already stitched. So that's why it's a back stitch. We're working back like that. So you jump forward here, and then you jump back towards where the stitching is already done. And that just helps create a neat straight line that's anchored securely. So I'll do one more, and then we'll talk about the length of back stitches and stuff like that and why you would do this. So there's forward and then back. Now you could jump ahead 2, 3, 4. I could even do this whole line here if I wanted to. Jump forward this far and then go back, but you'll see that it has a very different look. So it's probably hard to tell on camera, but this is loose here because it's jumped across so many stitches, and it just doesn't look as good. It doesn't have quite that defined detail, and it doesn't match up with all the X's. If I had a bunch of cross stitches here, you wouldn't see the detail quite the same way you would if you matched up your line with the little X's. So we'll just jump ahead here and go horizontal. So now, remember, it's forward for your needle coming up and then back towards the stitching. So let me roll this up so I can hold it better. This is actually how I stitch in hand most of the time. I roll up the side because I'm left-handed, and then this hand stays in the back to feel for knots, and then this hand does the stitching typically. So my other hand is just back there feeling in case it gets knotted in the back. So to do this line, I went forward and now back towards the stitching. So I'm going to go forward again here. Hopefully this 6 count makes it easy to see, and then back towards what you've already stitched. And it just gives it a little bit neater finished look. Now you could try to save yarn, and I used to do this a lot when I was cross stitching in the early years. Thread was expensive and I wanted to use as little as possible. So every other stitch I would go this way and go forward, and then I go that way and go back. But since I'm trying to teach this properly, I won't do that. But that can sometimes save you a little thread, is doing it both ways. But I will do this the way it looks the neatest, which is always going forward beyond the stitch and then back to what you've already stitched. My kiddo just came home from work, and in the back you'll see the difference here. This was the lines that we did those long stitches. They're just a lot looser, and this one, because we went forward here in the back, it kind of shows up pretty messy. Whereas the back stitch on the back is a solid line. See that? So you could also, if you wanted to cheat a little bit and save some time, you could do 2 stitches at a time, but again, it just won't look quite as neat or quite the same. So I could jump forward 2 stitches here on this one and pull it through, and then go back. And that is a little bit faster, but Depending on how many threads you have, it can be more noticeable against the cross stitch, but it is an option. If you really don't like back stitching and you're in a hurry to finish a project, you could go out a couple stitches like that and then back. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this one off, and then we'll finish off this thread and we'll talk about diagonals. So sometimes you want a little more detail than just following the edges of the pixels. Now you can see the straight line there. For this, I'm just going to tuck under the threads of the Ida cloth here because I really don't have anything to secure it to. So not that this matters, I'm going to take all this out, use this for future tutorials, but for now, that'll work. So I've secured that. Now we'll try some diagonals. So sometimes you want a shape to have a lot more detail, and that's where the diagonals come in. But really, it just works the same way. So we'll tie a knot here. And I'm gonna put a stitch in here just to get us ready. There we go. So for this diagonal, I would go, let's see, I don't think I drew this one even. So I did not, but that's okay. We'll just, you go diagonally up. Oops, hit my camera and ring light there. This thread really is too long to be doing a demo on. And then you go back to where your stitching is. So as long as you remember to go back where your line is, you shouldn't have any trouble figuring out where to go next. Because remember, this is easy because we have nothing underneath here. But when you're doing this on a real cross stitch, you've got all sorts of cross stitches underneath here of all different colors. So we're going to go forward again on the diagonal here, and then back to where our line is. And you can do that just all the way up here, forward, then back along the diagonal. And it works the same way, but what you get is a little more detail. So you're working over cross stitches, and there'll be probably one color, but maybe the stitches on this side of your diagonal are like a blue, and the stitches on this side might be a green. And even though you might be stitching over some that are blue or green, it'll still give the highlight you need. So the thicker the back stitch, the more of that cross stitch underneath it's going to cover up. So sometimes when you have single color along these squares, like we do in this one, no weird quarter or 3/4 stitches, then you want a thicker back stitch line so that you notice the back stitch more than the color of the stitches underneath. So we'll go forward and back, and then we'll get to this spot. I'm jumping ahead by talking about the colors and stuff like that because we can see more of that when I go to the real cross stitches over there. So now we're changing direction here. So forward, then back to where our line is. And now we have a conundrum here, a very minor one, but I tried to draw like a pumpkin shape here, so I put a stem on it. So now we have to think about going different directions or stopping and starting. So I could continue on going across, or I could take a turn up here and outline this and then go back and work on this. So it's easier for small areas to just catch them when you're there and then work your way back to where you left off. So we can do this little stem here. And if you hear birds in the background, I put on dog TV on YouTube, on our television, to keep my dog from barking. She's been a little bit barky tonight. I cooked corned beef for supper, which the humans in this house really like corned beef, so there wasn't any leftovers for the dogs, so they got regular dog food, and she's not the happiest. She's a bit spoiled. She's a either 90 or 100 pound, maybe now, large dog, so she does like her human food. So all that to say, she was being a little bit barky to our other dogs who are a little bit slower at eating and stuff like that. So I put on dog TV for her to keep her occupied so she can watch all the birds and squirrels on there. Works great, by the way, if you need something like that, a little break from your critter. So this is just a very simple stem, but I'm gonna come down ahead of where I was, but luckily, maybe I made it that way on purpose. When I come down here, I'm gonna be only 1 stitch away from where I left off. Sometimes you'll be more, and you have to kind of work your way back. Usually I do that by weaving my thread. Yep. Go to the right spot here. By weaving it behind other stitches to help secure it, and that way it won't be as loose. So now for this one, we can go forward and back and continue on with that line here. So forward, my thread is getting much shorter than expected, but this is 6 count. So forward, then back. I think you get the idea here. So we'll just do one more here because now we're at a diagonal again. And so then you just keep going with the pattern. Forward 1 and back. And there you'll see. That does use a little bit more thread when you're doing diagonals as opposed to doing the horizontal or vertical, because diagonals are just longer, Pythagorean theorem and all that good math stuff. But that's okay, because usually backstitch is fewer threads than what you're using for the cross stitch. So you should have plenty of thread to do that, because it really does look neater if you do the forward and then the back. It won't look as neat on the back side because you have those longer threads, but it does really make a difference on the front and gives you those really straight lines, because if you're doing this way, then you're poking up through the thread sometimes and you're pushing it off to either side of the stitch, whereas when you're poking down, you can aim a little bit better. So this will come up with the same result, but that's not really backstitch. It's just outlining, which is an option. I used to do that a lot. But if you want to do true backstitch, it's always forward and then back to the line that you've already stitched. Okay, I think we got the idea there with the diagonal. Now we're going to talk about when you do want to go across several stitches, and that's when you don't have a shape that's quite as simple as, say, a square or an octagon, or things that are a little less geometric. So I was doing an unboxing from Fan Cells earlier today of a cross stitch that had back stitching on it, and it had sails for a sailboat, and that's one I can think of offhand, as well as kind of the examples I just showed you here, where these don't follow exact horizontal and vertical and diagonal. They kind of reach out in several different directions here in order to make the cactus thorns look a little bit more realistic than if they were only diagonals and only straight horizontal and vertical. So that's where I'm going to get a new thread here. That's where our triangle comes into play here. It's not a very good knot, but that's okay. We just need it to stay temporarily. So I started off this triangle. I'm going to roll this backwards so it's out of the way. So this is also a good tutorial in how I stitch by hand, is rolling it up and just keeping my fingers underneath. Now for the really big cross stitches, I need to take a photo of one really big one that I'm working on, because what I like to do is lay it across my legs like a blanket, and I'll roll up most of it except for maybe a foot or two to make it a little more flexible and easier for me to hold. And I will use clips, a couple of clips to hold the rest of the roll and just lay it on my lap. So we're going to start out here. This first diagonal is actually across 2 stitches there. So we're going to go down and back. Well, actually, I'll just go up and down for this first one. It doesn't matter because I have nothing stitched yet in this line. So I'll just go up, and we're going to follow this trace here. The next hole I come to is 2 stitches down. So that gives just a narrower diagonal than you would across one hole to the other. And I have 2 of those there. So this one is again across 2 stitches. So I'm going to come up this hole and go back down that hole. So I see where that line is hitting a hole, and I try to find where that hole is on the back. Sometimes that's another reason why I like to work by hand, because I can just flip. If I'm having trouble getting my needle to go where it wants to, I just flip it over and look, and that's harder to do with a hoop or a frame. So I went up 2 stitches. Now I'm going to go back. And you're going to see where this is going to start using a little more thread, and why I cheat sometimes. This next one goes 3 down. So in order to make this a narrower line here as we head towards the bottom of the tree, this one goes across 3 vertical stitches. So I'm going to come up this hole and back across 3 stitches to that hole. So you again look for where the line that's on your canvas, if you do have lines on there, where it intersects each hole. So it intersects there and there, so those are my 2 holes to stitch. So I'm going to come up this one and then count 3 up and 1 over. If you don't have the lines on your cross stitch, you normally wouldn't, because you're stitching over stitches. So there we go. Now you'll see I'm way back here at this hole. My next stitch is another one of the 3. So 1, 2, 3 and over 1. So I'm way back here, and I need to come up over here to do a true back stitch. So that's 3, 6 stitches across the back that I'm reaching. In those cases where these back stitches get really long, I will go ahead and cheat a little bit. So since I came down this hole, it means I can actually come up this hole and stretch downwards. So this way, in the back, it's only stretching across 3 stitches instead of the 6 it would be if I were to jump all the way forward to that hole and work backwards. So that's where cheating can kind of come into play, is when you have these lines that go across multiple stitches for a very narrow diagonal. So there's 1, 2, 3, and down. But now my needle just came down this hole. It's going to have to go forward, because I can't come back up the same hole I just went down, or I'll just undo my stitch. So the cheating method is kind of back and forward, back and forward, back and forward, but it does save some thread, and it looks pretty close to the same on the back. So now for this one, I did 4 across, and you will see them go pretty big as 4 or 5 stitches sometimes for a very narrow diagonal line, like the sail of a boat or something like that. But you can see how this is really better defining a tree shape. So this next one, you follow across the line, we're going to go 4 stitches before we get that next hole there that intersects with the line. So we're going to jump all the way down those 4 stitches. We're not going to split threads here between them. We're just going to jump all the way down where the next hole is, and then work our way back. And we can do it here one more time. This is 3 though, so we can do it the correct way would be jumping, because my needle went down this hole right here. So I'm way back here. So I'm just gonna jump across those 4 and those 3 to come up here. So I got a really long line in the back, but it's in the back, it doesn't show. And go up 3 and over 1. Like so. So now we have a much narrower little tree outline than we would if we went diagonals. So we get a lot more detail in shapes that we can do if we go across. Now it may be tempting, let's look at this one because this one goes 2 and then down 1. It might be tempting in some of these patterns if you don't know backstitch and you're not used to it. You may be trying to do like every square and you're trying to come up in the middle of a stitch and split them like that. But that can mess with your fabric as well as your already made stitches. It can split the threads and make them pretty messy. So you focus on where the holes are when you're making the line. So this next hole is here. And we're going to go back like that. And then looks like we got, I just kind of did random stuff here. Gonna cheat on this one and go forward, but now I have to go back again, and it looks like the next hole is way down here. See that? So this line doesn't intersect a hole until way down there, so it's another 4 stitcher. So I'm gonna go forward and then back, and because that one is so long, I will go ahead now and come up there and do this one. And these look like just a few horizontal ones here. So I'll just do those the regular way. Back, back. And then this one is across 2 there. So here's the line, the next hole is up here. So I will try to find that hole there. Put it across here. You get the idea. We could do this all day. There's another 4 where the line is going across the middle of all of these stitches to there and back. So I'm not sure if you want to finish out this tree. My thread is actually getting pretty short, so I'm going to cheat a little and go that way. Do a little more. I guess we don't have to finish this one because I'm just probably going to take it out when I'm done with this video anyway. So you get the idea. You can do much more complicated shapes when you diagonal across several stitches. So now I made this up right before I started filming this. This is just a basic tree because I had green with me, so this is hard to see. This is dark green and this is dark blue. So the tree is at night here in this little scene. And you can't really tell some of the details here because it's kind of mixing in with that background a little bit. So we're gonna make that come out with some backstitch. So black is a more harsh outline color. That's what's showing on my needle case here is the black to really make things stand out. So for some designs and styles, you want that. For others though, the backstitch may be different colors to be just a little bit more subtle. So because this is cross-stitched with 6 strands, I'm gonna pull out a couple here. I'll use like 4 strands for this. Yeah, that should be good. So it's thinner than what I use for the cross stitch, but not too thick. And you can play with the thickness depending on how you want the lines to come out. So you could use 2 strands on 14 count for backstitch if you want really thick lines, but typically you use 1 strand. So I'm gonna use 4 strands here. And we're gonna start with the ground. We're gonna outline the ground, and it's hard to see with the dark green, but there is a trunk of this tree. So I'm gonna start my thread this time because I have stitches to work with. I'm gonna work this underneath like that to secure it. Now I don't want to pull too tight for the first stitch or my securing thread there will come out. So I'm gonna do back stitching the proper way. I'm not gonna skip across or anything. I'm just gonna do each stitch here, and I'm gonna go between that blue and the green to separate the ground from the sky. And we'll see if we can make a difference in this little chart here, or chart, this little design. I can't really even call it a design. I just kind of made it up as I went along. I didn't follow any sort of pattern. I just picked up green and started, and went from there. So I kind of pictured a little tree in my head because that gives a chance for several different types of diagonals. That's why a tree is good for teaching. So as you can see here, I'm going forward and then back, but this is with stitches in the way. So I'm just creating an outline or separation between the green and the black here. So going forward always. And then back down towards the line that I've already stitched. There. And we'll keep going here a little bit because we got the trunk of the tree coming up, and we can talk about ways to again deal with that. So one more stitch before we get to that tree trunk here. Forward and then back. So I'm going to do this just like I did that little pumpkin stem on my example I did. So I'm going to go forward here up the tree trunk and then back down. So I'm going up and then back down, and I'm going to outline this tree trunk. All the way. There's only 2 rows on it. It's hard to get much detail with a 6 count. And then forward and back. Forward down here and back to where the stitching is. Forward and back. And then now that I'm here, I'm going to go back up this hole that I just stitched because I'm going forward and back to finish this line here that I was at before. So forward and back. And again, the cheating way would be, well, I call it cheating. It's just a different way to do it, but it does have its negatives. So it's harder to show on this one because it's 6 count with weird thread numbers. But if I poke back up here where I already stitched, sometimes you'll split your back stitch color there into 2 threads. If it's like 2, like you're doing 11 count, you'll split them and then you won't get as neat of a line. So that's why we always go forward and then back. So I'm gonna get to the end here on purpose because then we got to do some of this tree so we can talk about different options for how to move your thread back to where you need to be to do more back stitching. So I'm just going to continue these last couple stitches here real quick. Forward, back, but hopefully you can already see the results of just doing our little mist there. This 6 count is a very, it's not a very tight weave, it's very loose weave, so it's easy on this particular weave to sometimes poke your needle up in the wrong spot and miss the hole. So that is another difference between good Ida and cheap Ida cloth, is the weave, how tight it is, and whether or not you can stick a needle up the middle easily. So I have a couple options here. Now I could go across the back and thread my needle here through some stitches to get myself back to where the first outline here of the tree was started, back toward the middle here. And then I can work my way all the way around. Or, since I was right here, I could start here and just work my way around. So I could just start in this corner here. And I'll do, the reason I picked a tree here is I'll do it 2 different ways. So up this side, I will do it just along each stitch, like the horizontal and vertical that you would do for something very pixel stitch type. So I'm just going to follow along between the 2 different colors like this, just going horizontal lines and vertical. And you'll see the difference when I do the other side of the tree, doing the diagonals, where I can give more detail and give the tree a little more natural look. So this is kind of the pixelated version where you only go horizontal. Here. You probably get the idea. Here. So you can see it's got that stair step or zigzag look to it. And every once in a while, like there, I missed a little bit, and so I'm going to try to match it up there. I had some green that was going to show on the other side unless I pushed it aside and worked it back where it belonged. So forward, back, forward, back. And then go horizontal here, forward, back, and then vertical again up here. So that's the easiest way, is just to follow between the two colors in a stair step or horizontal and vertical way. But we're going to get a little fancier here as we get to the top and down the other side. So I could, well, it's already too late. I'll just continue this whole side. I was going to say that I could start going diagonal and show you some stuff on this side at the point, but I've already gone too far. So, and I'll show you what I mean here in a minute. So we'll go ahead. Hopefully, I'm trying to chat a little while I do this so it's not too boring here. So forward, back till we get to the top of the tree. And then I'm going to start doing things a little bit different for the other side to make it look a little neater. So you can definitely see there's a tree there now. But I'm going to start, because I want the point of the tree up here. So I'm going to change right here. So I still have one stitch left, but that's okay. I am going to poke my needle because I don't have enough. I'd be going for a hole if I had more background, but I didn't do enough. So I'm going to poke up here and go diagonal and show you how you can get a point on something that's pixelated. So I'm going to jump across now and start doing diagonals. So I'm going to go down 2 here, and now my tree has a point. And now I'm going to jump all the way down to here. I don't know if you can see where my needle is. So instead of coming out here and going diagonal, those are all blue stitches that I'd be going diagonal across. I want some green in there. So I'm going all the way down here before I join back up. And this is where you need the pattern, because the pattern will mark this out for you. You don't have to. But there you see I've gone across this blue stitch here, but at a distance it shows as more of a diagonal line. You got just a tiny bit of green popping on this side and a tiny bit of blue on this side, but at a smaller count and at a distance that won't really be very obvious. So I'm gonna go ahead and just do a horizontal here on this one. But now I'm going to do a diagonal across 2 on here. So I'm going to come up, so we're right here. We're going to go diagonal across this blue and this green. So I'm going to come up at the green there. And again, your pattern will show you. And I'm going to go back down like this. And there again, you see we have a little bit more of a diagonal with just a tiny bit of green on this side and a tiny bit of blue. And now we're getting into an area that's a bit wider here. So this is where you could do diagonals if you wanted to, just across the stitch, but you are going to end up with a little bit of green on the side of the diagonal. So that will happen with a pattern that doesn't use quarter stitches or 3/4 stitches. So you will get some of that color moving over to the other side, or showing a little bit on the other side of that back stitch when you go diagonal across a single color like that. Now there is a way to fix that, a way around it, and I'm just going to cheat a little and get this line done so I'm not worrying where my needle's coming up with this really thin weave. It's just coming up where it wants to. So I will just stitch this bottom row real quick here to finish this off. So I'm jumping pretty far to make this work up quickly. But like I said, you don't want those longer stitches. It actually looks better when they're close up. So at a distance, I'm not sure how much of that you can really tell, but this line is much more curved and natural like a tree, whereas this is much more stair-stepped and pixelated, more like a cartoon. Okay, so the way you would fix those diagonals that have that green showing up in the blue side there, let me turn the light, it's kind of shining in my face here a little bit. So you could do 1/4 and 3/4 stitches, and that's where you do, you have to poke in the middles of these stitches. So I will show you real quick because you do see it on patterns. They're pretty rare though on the stamped cross stitch. They give you how to do it in the instructions, but I honestly don't think I've seen any 1/4 or 3/4 stitches on a stamped cross stitch, but you do run into them quite a bit with counted cross stitch. So we might as well talk about it. And I'm not even going to tie a knot in this one. I'm just going to bring my needle to the back here and just leave a tail because I don't need to secure it. So the way a 1/4 stitch works is you pop your needle into the hole here, if I can find a hole. Oop, there we go. And you come down in the middle of the stitch, or of the square. So you're poking through the fabric into the middle of that square with your color. And that is called, oops, I knew there was going to be an issue if I didn't tie that off. So that is a 1/4 stitch. Now imagine if you came in with if this were green, like our tree, and if you came in with a blue and did a 1/4 stitch opposite of that one, then you would do a back stitch line between the two, and it would separate the two colors and finish off that X. So a 3/4 stitch would be starting out the same way. So you would do poke in the middle there and come down, and like I said, this is more advanced. You don't see this in the stamped cross stitch, at least not that I've seen so far. So a 3/4 stitch, as you could imagine, would be coming across and finishing off the X while leaving this little 1/4 undone. And then you could come in with another color and do just a little 1/4 stitch. But typically the way you see it done, you see 2 1/4 stitches of 2 different colors, and then the back stitch line goes through there, which makes it really easy to follow where your back stitches go, because everywhere where you have those 2 1/4 stitches without the other line, you know that that's kind of the path your back stitch is taking. So that's how you deal with the diagonals that have 2 different colors across it. So you would do a 1/4 stitch on this side in blue, this side on green, and then do your line across with the back stitching. But that's a little more advanced stuff than what we're dealing with stamped cross stitch. So that's just a little info on how that works. So now we're gonna maybe look at a couple here, and I probably have the wrong needle for this. So I'm gonna put this back. This is a little Joy Sunday kit that I got as one of my product review packages. I believe this came from GBFKE, and I did an unboxing the other day. So it was fun and quick and easy, so I went ahead and stitched it up. This is Joy Sunday, meaning that they do print the lines for backstitch. So you can see that we have a line here. Now the rest of the backstitch lines I've actually covered up by the regular stitching, but Joy Sunday does a lot more samplers then Spring Brand and Mona Lisa typically doesn't have very much backstitch at all. They do have it on some, but pretty rare. They're more of a tapestry type company. But anyway, I digress again. So Joy Sunday will print the back stitches on there. Spring Brand does not, and Joy Sunday does have a lot more of the samplers where there are alphabets and stuff like that. So that's why they print them. Even though you cover up a lot of the back stitching as you're cross stitching, the back stitching that shows up in the blank areas will still be there for you to follow along. So you can see this one's pretty simple. This is a 14 count. So they only gave me one strand here of 310 black for the outlining. This one is outlined completely in black. So we only need one of the 6 strand because 14 count is done with 2 strands. So I only need one to do the back stitching on this. And I'm not going to do all of the back stitching. I'm just going to talk a little bit about it and show you an example where it's really useful on this particular design. If I can keep my thread from, I had already pulled that one out, but it got caught back up in there. So since this thread is so long, I'm going to go ahead and chop it in half since I'm trying to stitch this on camera. And it'll just be easier for me to pull and work with just one strand here that's cut in half. So it's a little bit shorter, but I got a different size needle here. This is a much finer needle with a sharp point, which means it's a little bit easier for backstitch. So I don't use those larger needles that come with 11 counts very often. I prefer having smaller needles, even for the cross stitch part of 11 count, because it's just easier for me to poke into the holes in the back when I'm going back to front. But you definitely want a smaller needle for the back stitch because you are trying to poke through a bunch of stitches that are already done. So here we have what looks like a house, but we really can't make out any of the details of this house. So the border I'm not too worried about because you see that it's just horizontal and vertical lines. I think that would be pretty easy. But in this case, I might change up what the pattern says because this is kind of a line on its own. I may use 2 strands on this line to really make it stand out a little bit more. But for the stitching, the back stitching within the design, it's going to be 1 strand. And a lot of times the pattern will say that. This one says it in Chinese, but here's what we're looking at here. And so the back stitching is showing up on here as those green lines. So we can see a lot of them are easy to see where they will start and end. So we're basically outlining the lighthouse. I'm thinking about presidents right now. And then the different stripes of colors. So you don't even really need the pattern for a lot of those. This one is very basic. Again, just with the horizontal and vertical lines. It's keeping everything pixeled. It's not doing the diagonals. So you can see there, just follow the green lines. So I'm going to start out with this house, which is right up against the red there. So it's pretty easy to see where to start. And I know some people like to wash their little canvas before they do the back stitching, but I prefer, because Joy Sunday does sometimes have those helpful lines on there, I prefer to do it after. So I'm going to secure this thread there. Now I can pull it pretty tight here. It's secure in there. And I'm going to start the back stitching. Now this is 14 count. That's pretty thick there. So it's going to be a little bit trickier sometimes to find the holes and probably trickier for you to see. But I'm going to come up right against where that red and that blue is. Actually, I'm going to go right there at the corner of the house and the red and the blue. Going to come up there. And I'm not going to pull too tightly, because if I pull too tightly, now that I'm working between stitches on a real cross stitch here, if you pull too tightly, that thread is going to disappear down between those stitches, and that's not what you want. You want it to lay on top there so it can be seen. So don't pull tightly. But there we have our first back stitch separating that red from the blue. Now we're going to keep going down to the roof of the house here and separate that. So I'm going to go forward one. And this, again, is based on what the pattern is showing. It's just that because it's just a straight line, I don't need to keep referring to the pattern. I know it's just a straight line there, down between the lighthouse and the house. So even though you sort of have to follow a pattern, once you have your stitching done, you'll see that where your back stitching becomes pretty clear just looking at your cross stitch. So now I'm going to go back one, right there. So forward and then back, and just let the stitch lay across there and not pull too tight. And then I'll go forward again and back. Hopefully you can see that okay. So one strand here is not showing up too much. It's not giving too much dark black line there, but it is creating a little bit of definition. So that's where you kind of want to play around with the number of strands based on what look you're going for. So it's pretty harsh on this, but that's because it's stitched with one strand, cross stitch, and then back stitched with the same number, which is one strand. But on this, it's stitched with two strands, 14 count. And now I'm doing the back stitch with just one strand. So I'm going forward and then back to the line that I've already stitched and just letting it kind of lay across there and not pulling too much. You don't want it too loose either, which is why it's good to go only one stitch forward, because if you do get it too loose, it's a very small stitch. Whereas if you got a really long stitch, like if I went all the way across this house in one stitch, that would be pretty loose and it would wiggle over time and just not look nearly as neat. Okay, so I've come to a decision point here with the back stitching. I can keep going down between the lighthouse and the house here, which is probably what I'll do for right now. Or I could start curving off and doing the rest of this roof and then come back down and do the rest of the house and all that. So you kind of want to pick your path. But just to make this easier to see for you all, I'm just going to keep going down and separate out the house from the lighthouse there. So forward, then back, forward, then back. And you see we're getting that line there that's going to define now the house versus the lighthouse. So this is a really good kit to practice back stitching. There are 4 of these. There are 4 seasons, so I picked the autumn one. But I had so much fun with this one, I couldn't seem to stop stitching it. So I went back today, as a matter of fact, and purchased the other 3 for the season, because these run like just a few dollars for these little ones. Forward, then back. Okay, so now I think I've come to the end of the house. Oh, maybe one more here. So where it looks a little murkier here with that gray, I'm going to refer to the pattern and see that nope, you don't go any further. So that is part of the ground. So where that other color here stops, that's where the back stitching stops. So that's as far as we go, and then this is the ground. So we leave the gray alone there. So now I'm going to start going sideways across here to keep going with the house. I could go either direction. Could go towards the lighthouse, or I could go towards the house. I'm going to decide to go this way towards the house. So forward and back, forward, then back. And you see we're starting to see a house emerge. So you, again, don't pull too tight because this is only one strand. It could easily disappear there between the two stitches. So you still want it to show, but just a little bit. And we have a little window in the house, which you really can't see right now. But if we backstitch it, the window will become more clear. So the window is a nice little rectangle. Like I said, this whole thing is just horizontal and vertical lines for backstitch. So pretty easy here. I'll maybe speed this up here. For those of you that like ASMR, I could just shut up and let you hear the sound of my thread. Forward, back, one more stitch in the house. And now we have the tree here, this autumn tree up against the house. So we start going up because I see the orange there. So I know that's the start of the tree. So now I'm going to go up the side of the house here. And you can take it one element at a time, or, you know, like house, then tree, then roof, then lighthouse. Or you could just follow along a straight line until it wants to change direction or something. So for example, this part still needs to be backstitched, the line here between the tree and the ground. And then we have ground and water mixed in here. There, see this line continues on underneath the tree. And then we've got a little bit here between the tree and the water. And then we have this whole thing here that's got backstitch here. So we've got all these other lines, but I went ahead and turned the corner and I'm gonna keep working on the house. And once you finish an area and you want to move on to another area, you can either cut the thread after you end it on the back and then restart it somewhere else, or you can do what I will show you here in a second. So I will get the rest of the line of this house here, and then we have the purple of the roof coming up here, but I want to go over and get this window, and it's pretty close. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to wind my thread under some already done stitches to help secure it so it's not loose. So there, now I've kind of snuck underneath the stitches to where this window starts. So now I'm going to do this window, and I can see it without looking at the pattern pretty clearly, but I'm not sure how well you can see that in the camera. It is 2 stitches wide by 3 stitches long there, but if you're not sure, of course, you can look at the pattern there. So that window is a slightly different color gray. So my needle's probably hard to see because it's so tiny, but that tiny needle is just making it so much easier to poke through between these stitches. I really do prefer the tiny needles, especially for backstitch. I don't like blunt needles at all in my stitching, so I will sometimes get embroidery needles rather than cross-stitch needles when I'm at the store. So there's our 3 going vertical for that window. Now we'll go horizontal for 2. And I can see the 2 different colors there, so I see where to put those back stitches. And how long are we at? We're at an hour and 8 minutes. Wow, I didn't think I could talk that long about back stitching. I'm going to finish this window and then we're going to look at the other one, because this one, like I said, is a really basic one. If you're looking for just practicing backstitch, these lighthouse kits from Joy Sunday would be a good one for that, because it's just horizontal and vertical lines, and they're separating 2 different colors. So it's really easy to see where the back stitching goes, and you don't have to do much pattern following to see that. But our last one is going to get a little more complicated, and that's why I chose that one to finish and show you as well. So let me go ahead and finish this window, and then we'll move on. So I think you'll get the idea. So don't fear the backstitch. The backstitch is a good thing, especially for these simpler ones. It's just forward and then back. And I think backstitching on 14 count is actually easier because you're only dealing with one thread, so you're not splitting threads and stuff like you can with two. So there we go. Our house is starting to take shape there. So hopefully you can see that. So that's this example. Now we'll move on, because this is a little more complicated because we're dealing with fur from an animal and a nose that needs a little more realistic look, and then the eyes there as well. So we'll pull this one out. This was another Joy Sunday. This was not a PR package. This was one I bought myself. And there are a couple more to this set that I thought were really cute because they're so small. That just fits in the palm of my hand. Really easy stitch to be able to just hold in my hand and flip back and forth. Something really simple. It was just little splotches of color, so it was very easy to stitch. But you can see some of those back stitching lines do show up here around the edges, but a lot of them have been covered up with the stitching. But there are some very faint gray lines here. Hopefully you can see that, which will help where it goes outside of the stitching onto the plain fabric. That's where you probably don't want to wash them and then do the back stitching, because you do have at least a little bit of help there with some of the stitches. So this one came with only one strand of each color, but that's all I needed, and I still had plenty left over. But we do have, for the back stitching, is 413 instead of black. It's very dark gray. And because this is 11 count, we're again going to use only one strand, and I'm going to go ahead and cut it in half. I'll put my needle there where I can find it again. And separate here and get just one strand. And I'm going to chop it in half, because this one really won't take much thread to do back stitching. Probably just one or two strands and this whole thing will be done. But it is cute. There's a lion and I think a tiger maybe, and an elephant that I have seen. But the elephant looks slightly different. It doesn't have back stitching, so I don't think I'm really interested in that one, but because it looks different enough that it doesn't look like part of the set. So again, we have our little bitty needle here. And I'm going to start at the bottom of this one, because that's where you get a lot of those diagonals there. And I'm going to pull the pattern out here. So the back stitch is going to show up as this orange line on the pattern. So here we go. So where we can't see the lines through those stitches that we've already done, we can see it on the pattern very clearly. So we're going to start down here at the bottom. So instead of being straight across those 3 stitches, we do a little zigzag here. And that's to give it a little bit more of a natural fur look. So I'm going to tuck my thread under to secure it here. And whoop, I'm used to longer. I pulled it right on out. Let's see, and I'm looking through the camera to do this. So what I like to do is go back around and do a second time like that, kind of a little loop on there. And that helps secure it so I can pull it pretty tight. Okay, so we're gonna start here at this corner, and instead of going across these 3, we're gonna go zigzag. So the pattern shows coming up here. We'll start at the very bottom, and our back is going to be a diagonal on this stitch. And then the next one is another diagonal here. So it comes up here at a diagonal, and then back down where we've already stitched. So those back stitches are going to lay across. That's pretty hard to see. I probably should do this in 2 strands so that you can see it. But they're just going to kind of lay on top of those stitches. So the next one comes down this bottom hole and then go back up here. And actually, you know, I think I am going to stop. This is one of those where I think it would benefit from having 2 strands. So if you bear with me for just a second, I'll show you what I mean here. So I'm going to cut and pull this out, because since we're laying diagonally across stitches, it's a little bit harder to see those single threads sometimes. So I'm going to pull that out, and we're going to do 2. Now sometimes if you start with 1 and decide you want 2 instead, you can just go over the same stitch twice, but it will take twice as long. Duh. So we're going to try again here, and this is where you can play around with patterns a little bit. So if you're stitching a few and decide that, no, that doesn't highlight as well as I wanted to, I wanted something a little bit darker, that's where you can switch it out and do 2. So I'm going to go ahead and do the loop method, which if you've never seen this before, you can take 1 long strand and fold it in half so there's a loop down at the bottom, and you thread the 2 ends here. I'll do that. And now we have a nice little loop on the other side, and that's how we're going to secure our thread. So we're going to start kind of in the same place here at the bottom. So I'm going to do the first part of the stitch and then the second before I pull. And now I'm going to flip it to the back here and pull, and when I get near the end, I'm going to stick my needle through that loop there and then pull, and that secures it. So that's very handy when you're dealing with 14 count, because you can do that even well for the cross stitch part, because you're stitching with 2 threads. Okay, so we're going to do our little zigzag at the bottom here, but with 2 threads, and hopefully you can see the difference there. So it's showing up a little bit better, I think. Since this is a gray color, it's not quite as harsh as a black. So there's our 3 little diagonals. And now our next one, our next 2 stitches here are straight diagonals. Diagonal, here, diagonal, and then we're going to do one that's up 2, and then back down a diagonal, and a diagonal, and then, well, actually this one is 2 by 3. So let's get started here. So we have a diagonal, and there's no stitch there. That's okay. Some of the outlining is going beyond. Did I get it right? Nope. Sometimes with this 14 count, it's hard for me to see where to poke the hole. There we go. So we're going to go diagonal. So I'm going across empty fabric here. There is no stitch there. The stitches are all around it, but they're small and light colored, so it'll still look pretty good there. So there were 2 diagonals, and I can even see the line drawn on here. So forward. Got a little knot there. There we go. And then back. So we did our 2 diagonals, and then next we're going to go across the 2. So we're going to go, is it 2 then 1? We're going to go into the stitching again here. So it's a vertical up 2 over 1. So I go to where that stitch ends there. If you can, trying to get it to where you can see that needle. I should get like a bright red needle or something. That would be cool for teaching. So I'm going up 2 vertically and over 1 horizontally to know where to put the needle. So it's up 2 vertically, here 1, 2, and over 1 horizontally to make that little line there. So, and then back down. There we go. Now the next one is a little bit up. It's a regular diagonal back down. That one's easy. It's the one after that that's a little bit trickier. So the next one is going to go diagonally down across this stitch, just following what the pattern shows there. So just focus on where those holes are in the grids, or where the squares end. So there we go. So the next one is the one that's going to be a little bit more complicated here. So we just did that, and then we came down 1. No, wait, we're down here. So we came down 1. This one is a 3/2. So it goes, the next hole that comes up is way up here. So even though it's going across a couple stitches here, use that finger, the next hole, or area where all the stitches intersect, is way up there. So that's horizontal 2 and up 3. So we're going to count horizontal 2 and up 3. See, we're down here, horizontal 2, up 3. This is where we're going to come in. So I'm going to eyeball that spot and come up there. So that one again, horizontal 2, up 3 like the pattern, and then back, meeting up with where we stitched before. Now this is where I talk about 2 threads can separate. If you're going across a bunch of stitches, I don't know if you can see this, but the 2 threads are trying to go on either side of the middle of this stitch right now. So it kind of separates those. So you want to kind of work it and lay it across there to where those 2 threads hold together and stay together instead of separating on either side of the middle of that stitch. Okay, so that was that one. Now we go diagonally down 1 based on the pattern. That's easy. So diagonally down 1. And then back to where we stitched before. So there we go. And now our next one is going to go, so we just did this stitch here, diagonally down 1. Now we're going to go up 2 over 1 for where that next hole is. Up 2 over 1. So we'll do that here. And you can kind of see where it's even showing up there on the canvas. Up 2 over 1. And then back down to meet up with what we've already stitched. And then this next one we can just see on the canvas here, or the Ida cloth, that gray line. So I don't even have to look at the pattern for that one. I can just follow along. So that's a horizontal up 2 over 1. And then we go just straight up 2. So you're starting to see how it looks like nice fur there. So straight up diagonally 2, which is going to seem weird because I'm splitting these 2 gray stitches, but you'll see why in a minute. Okay, we're going to split across those 2, and then the pattern wants me to go sideways here, like so. It's a little bit odd. And then it wants me to go diagonal 1 back over here. I'm just looking down at the pattern, looking where the holes meet up with the line, and then it wants me to go horizontal 3, which follows along the bottom of that gray, the light gray. It's all gray down there. So I'm going along 3 here. So 3 goes 1 beyond where the stitching is. I do like it better with the thicker line there. So we are here. So I went 3 across. Now I'm going to go diagonally in and then up 2 over 1. So I'm going to go diagonally in here. If I can get to the hole in the right place. There we go. So you can see why, even though this is a little one, it's a little more complicated with the back stitch because you do have to follow a pattern to get all the zigzags. I've got a little knot here that I'm trying to work out. There we go. Yep, it's still messed up a little bit. Okay, we got rid of our knot. So that was diagonal. Okay, now we need to do the 2 over 1. So it was horizontal 2, 1, 2, and then up 1. Like so. There we go. And then after that, it's horizontal up 2 and over 1 the opposite direction. And the more you do it, the faster you get at counting there. So we just finished this stitch right here, up 2 over 1. Now we have a break. There's no stitch connecting this one to this one, but that's okay. We're just going to go ahead and act like we had a stitch there. So we're gonna go, the next one is up 2 and over 1, but it's kind of at the end of that gray and back towards this one. So we can kind of use the color to help us out here. So we're gonna end right here, there. So we're gonna go up 2 and over 1. So basically between the gray and the blue. And we're gonna come down. There we go. And then we've done that. Now we're gonna come back down here horizontally. So down 1 over 2. So that would be right there at the end of the blue stitching and over 1. Okay, starting to take shape there. And now we're going to go, where are we? Diagonally across. So our pattern shows we just did this one. Now we got another little line here that's just diagonally across this stitch. Then we're going to come across and do diagonally again and then go up that way. So I'm just going to go diagonally across like that. And now, so that was that one. We're going to go, this is just another single diagonal there for the stitch that's above it. Pretty easy. So even though it looks complicated, you just take one stitch at a time and look for where those lines intersect the holes in the fabric or the lines of the grid. So there we go. And then we're going to go up 2 over 1. So there's 2 over 1. You can kind of see a little bit of that gray line there on here. So up 2 over 1. And then back where we ended the other one. So a little more complicated there. And now we have a 2 over 1 horizontal. By that I mean the horizontal has the 2, the vertical has only 1. So there we go. And then here's one that's across 3. So again, this looks like a long line, but you don't want to split any stitches. So the hole is here. The next hole that line runs into is there. So that's across 3 and up 1. So we're going to go across 3 and up 1. So a little bit further into the wolf here, across 3 and over 1, like so. And then we're going to go back 2, across 2 and up 1. So 2 and up 1, and then back where we were. And again, inward 2 and over 1. And now we're getting into the dark gray, so it's going to be a little less defined through here. And then up 3, or across 3 over 1. There we go. And we're going to skip across 2 and go diagonally up and then over 2. You know what, I'm going to park this thread right here, and parking just means you leave it. Now for backstitching, you can park anywhere and finish off where you left off. For parking for cross stitch, you want to park in the lower left spot of the color of that stitch. But that's a whole nother video on parking. But I'm doing that just so I can go back and carry that and pick it up later. I think this is the other half of that single dark gray strand. I'm going to do one of the eyes real quick. So let's finish this video up because it's been an hour and 31 minutes. Hopefully some of you are still with me on the complicated part. If not, you can always go back and check it out later on. So we're gonna try one of the eyes here, and you see, we can see where part of that eye is by that black dot. So there's that black. So we're gonna go across the black, across horizontally at the top. That's a good place to start because that point of reference is really easy on our stitching. So we'll go across the top of the black, then do 2 more horizontal, and then down diagonally a couple. So it's actually pretty easy. So I'm gonna find where that hole is there, and that's why sharp needle makes it a little bit easier, but the stitching gets really thick once you're completed with all the cross stitching, because that's a spot where we have 8 different strands of thread going through that little hole already. So I'm going to go across the top, use the loop method to secure. Now I'm going to go horizontally across 2 more here. 1, 2, and some of these stitches are kind of disappearing into the thread, but you can see them there. Now we're going to go diagonally down 2. So let's see, that would be right there, and then back, and again forward on the diagonal, and then back. So we're starting to see an eye there, and then we go horizontal 2 again, forward and back, and again forward. That one's kind of tough to push it up through there. Forward and back, and then up 1, just straight up 1, forward and back, and then we're going to meet back up with where we started with a diagonal across there. So if I can find the right spot to get my needle up, there we go. Hello. Forward. Eric says hi.
Oh, are you still?
Yeah, but I'm about done. Forward and back. And there, now our wolf has an eye. And we can do the exact same to the other side, just mirror image. So it goes across 3, diagonally 2, down across 2, horizontal 1, and back up. So if I wanted to continue on with this thread, it's kind of a short thread because it was already cut in half. But I could just weave along a few threads here across the back so it's not just hanging, and that secures it a little bit more. And then we can do the same thing here on the other eye, and I think I will stop this video at the end. So we're going to go horizontal 3 here. 1, 2, 3, and then diagonal 2. If this wasn't so long, I could like do a time lapse of finishing this, but you get the idea. I think you don't need to see a time lapse cross stitch. I've never tried one of those before, actually. So we're going diagonally inward 2, 1, 2. It's kind of nice. This wolf has been sitting there for a few weeks waiting for me to finally get around to the tutorial that I had planned with it. And one of the downsides of having threads hanging is that they get caught sometimes in the other work that you're doing, which is what happened there. So I fixed it real quick by pulling it out. So diagonally 2, then horizontally 2, 1, 2, and I don't have to have it memorized or anything. I've got the chart right there, but it's also just a mirror image of this one, so I can look over at that one as well for reference. Horizontal 2. Kind of missed the hole a little bit there, but we'll make it fit. Yeah. See, this is what happens if you miss the hole. That's kind of between 2 stitches there, and it's not going to make a straight line, so I don't like that one. I'm going to pull it out and try again. So bear with me for just a second while I make sure that I can rethread this needle, because when you're a bit low on your eyesight, threading needles can be a little more fun. I have a needle threader, but it's not sitting over here, since I thought I was mostly going to be working on the really thick threads. I thought I could handle that with the big needle. Okay, we got it threaded. Yay! Okay, so I had missed and poked a little bit through the side of one of the stitches there. There, that's better. That time I got the hole, so that line will end up being nice and straight, like that. And then we go vertically. See, I pulled that one a little tight. The stitch is trying to sneak down in there between the 2. But since I have 2 threads, that's okay. So now we're going to go up 1, and then back down. And then we finish off by going diagonally to back where we started. And I think that will be a good place to end this, if I can get my needle to go up through that spot. There we go. And then diagonally back. So there we go. Our wolf has a nice matching set of eyes. And hopefully it's starting to look more like the picture here, although the colors are a bit different. But we have the eyes done. We have part of this fur done. And if you have trouble seeing it on the chart, this one is big enough that you can actually just read it off of here, off of the picture. But that's pretty rare. Normally on the bigger ones you can't see to that detail. But we'll finish the nose and finish the outsides, and our wolf will be done. So hopefully you got something useful out of this. I know I hear a lot of other content creators talking about stamp cross stitch and the scariness of backstitch, but it's really not scary, and I think the benefits far outweigh not doing it, because as you can see, those eyes and the fur on this one, that's with doing it. Whereas the example I showed at the start with, oh boy, we already lost it. There it is. With the bookmark, it's just a little bit fuzzier. So these trees could use a little bit of defining there, and maybe some of the lines here, these mountains. But it's just a little bit different style. So the budget friendly, the no name brand typically don't have any backstitch. They're a little more tapestry like this. And then the Joy Sunday and the Spring brand will have some backstitch at times to help really define the shapes and make things stand out. So that's what I have for you today. Let me know if you have any questions, if there are any further cross-stitch related tutorials you'd like to see on different topics. Let me know and I'll see what I can do for you. So thanks for watching. Talk to you next time.